What I'm going to say here is fact, and it's not conjecture, and it's not inflammatory at all. The biggest money in the world is accumulating gold and standing for delivery. And the odd thing about it, to your point, I think we're seeing a shift. Now you have Singapore getting into the game and opening up a market, a gold market.
Wait, did you catch that? We're not just talking millions. We're talking hundreds of millions of ounces quietly shifting hands. India's loading up, China's stockpiling, and yet silver's price hasn't budged. Why? Because when it finally does, it won't be a climb. It'll be a detonation. And now, what Andy says next will flip everything you thought you knew about silver. Brace yourself.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, it's the complete opposite in the equity market, which is actually, I think, stronger, makes a stronger statement. In the equity market, you have massive insider selling, and the big money, the insiders over the last 4 weeks, the institutional have sold 4.2 billion last week. Over the last 4 weeks, 2 billion per week, as the insiders are as the retail mom and pop are at the largest amount of stock exposure ever in history. They're all in on stocks, and that says something, I think, about where the direction of the stock market may be going. The insiders know the scoop. Well, look at the same thing in reverse with the metals market, the biggest money in the world. The central banks, the sovereign wealth funds, the family offices, they are draining the world's exchanges, as you know, standing for delivery. The largest delivery in the history of the COMEX market, I believe, in both gold and silver, occurred in May. You can correct me if I'm wrong on that, but I'm pretty sure it did. About $8.5 billion worth of gold was delivered in May, about 4.5 in March. The biggest money in the world is accumulating gold and standing for delivery. And the odd thing about it, to your point, is that the retail investor is immersed in the risk-on trade, immersed in traditional, equities and the traditional form of investing. And you have to wonder if the insiders are massively selling as on equities, as the retail investors are buying, but it's the opposite in gold and silver. Who's going to be right? And my guess is those closest to the information are right, and that to me is very telling. But yeah, you're right. The people on this side of the table in precious metals are missing out what's happening, and that's why we see the lowest premiums we've seen really in a very long time on metals. It's a lack of demand on the retail side more than anything, which is very, very confusing and hard to understand when you see what's happening up there. Curious to your take on the post that Chris Marcus put out last week. And I've always admired Chris's ability to chase down the story from an investigative journalistic standpoint. He's one of the best in this space. And he was talking about the fact that when you have large short positions on COMEX, that they're supposed to typically be offset with long positions in London. And he was framing it with the respect that if indeed the massive short position, the second largest ever in the history of the COMEX by the commercial banks that we see right now, if indeed it really is offset in London, where we're told they have somewhere in the neighborhood of a 250 million ounce float, if they're offset, he was saying that means there's only 7 million ounces in London that is not encumbered, something to that extent. And if it's not offset, if it's not hedged in London, that means a bank like Bank of America, typically something like that. According to Ted Butler, when he was alive, he would have said it would be Bank of America. But that means that there are banks or a bank that are wickedly, wickedly exposed to a rise. And maybe that's why we've seen on Wednesday of last week, 487 million ounces on paper traded. And on Friday, 356 million ounces. They are trying, by trading 800 million ounces over 2 days, to keep the price below $37 for sure. But I'm curious to your take on that. Do you think that what Chris is saying has some validity? Well, and it's funny, and although they didn't speak directly to silver, although I would argue the silver is the exact same thing, in fact, on steroids, the ECB warned that gold is a threat to the global financial system. I'll just read something to you real quick. I'm sure you saw this. Last month, the ECB, the European Central Bank, warned of increasing counterparty risk in gold derivatives for the euro area. In the May edition of the Financial Stability Review, the ECB added that a significant share of these gold derivatives were over the counter and not centrally cleared, leaving actors exposed to counterparty risk. As you said, the LBMA is not an exchange, it's an over the counter system, I guess you call it. The big point to take on board is an official recognition that the stand for delivery obligations on COMEX are behind the crisis, and they continue. Since November, warehouse stock has shown 26,470,000 ounces have stood for delivery. Eurozone banks have swapped gold for paper, and the gold is disappearing in deliveries. Behind the ECB's public concern is a far deeper one. It is as close as we can get to official warning that the gold paper game is coming to a very nasty end, likely to drive gold measured in paper currencies far, far higher. And incidentally, the same problem exists in silver, but without the central bank participation, more of a commercial bank, which means it's an existential threat to some of these banks if the shit hits the fan. That's in essence what you are saying, correct? I think we're seeing a shift. Now you have Singapore getting into the game and opening up a market, a gold market. They want pricing authority to shift towards Asia. And I think that's what is happening, whether it be with the Shanghai Metals Exchange, now an exchange that's being developed in Singapore, the BRICS exchange. There's no question that I think they've realized for a very long time that the pricing power, the West monopoly on metals pricing and settlement is something that they realize is a scam. And I think that buyers in Asia aren't just looking for better pricing. They're seeking autonomy. They're seeking the ability to set the prices. This is a big deal that I think people are missing. And even when the BRICS grain exchange was developed last year, the guy that is behind it said, we in the global South produce and consume more grain than the West does, but we can't control the price. It's done on COMEX. But with the development of this grain exchange, that will change. I think you could say the same thing here about the move eastward. And that's one of the scary things about the recklessness of the Western policies that are allowing the exchanges to be drained and flowing eastward to countries like India, countries like China, countries like Saudi Arabia and Russia, and all of the countries that understand what silver represents, standing for delivery. And maybe by the grace of God, someone in the Trump administration said, look, we've got to do the same thing here. We're in big trouble. Hence all of the deliveries we're seeing. I don't know, Bix, I know you had me on your show, but I'll ask you, I mean, when do we see the price suppression end? What does it take for this to be overwhelmed, for these banks to realize that this isn't just stupid, it's an existential threat to their survival? Are we getting there? Are we almost there? You get the mainstream media's borderline compulsive deception. And what I'm going to say here is fact, and it's not conjecture, and it's not inflammatory at all. I just think I think of the world that you and I grew up in. We're very close to the same age. I'll read you one paragraph, get your take on this. To your point, earlier this week, ABC journalist Jory Rand sought to reframe the escalating violence on the streets of LA, even as his own channel broadcasts images of cars completely engulfed in flames, the thick black smoke billowing into the night air. Nothing there was noting there that there was a large group of people running wild, Rand said. It could turn very volatile if you move law enforcement in there the wrong way and turn what is just a bunch of people having fun watching cars burn into a massive confrontation and acceleration between officers and demonstrators. Now, that's how the media portrays this. Just a bunch of people having fun watching cars burn. But if you bring in law enforcement, well, it could turn violent. Again, to your point, you can't make this stuff up, and it's very difficult. And that's why people aren't aware of the things that you and I talk about, the things that are so logical to us and to your listeners, because they're being gaslit by a media that would go as far as saying it's a peaceful protest and just a bunch of people having fun watching cars burn. But if you bring in law enforcement, watch out, it's going to get violent. Now, I don't understand that, and I have a hard time even saying it and rationalizing it, but that's the world we find ourselves living in. Let's just hope somehow, some way that we're able to look back at this and say, how did we ever get here? Thank God we found a way out of it. I sometimes wonder, after watching all the chaos we've seen the last several days.
If that didn't open your eyes to what's really happening with silver, nothing will. The smart money is already moving. The question is, will you be ahead of the curve or left behind? Hit that like button, subscribe, and smash the bell icon so you never miss a moment when the truth breaks wide open. This is just the beginning.